reciprocally interested.
For sure. I think my partner should be joining in like 10 seconds.
Grab some more paper just across on the other side of the room. I'll be back in literally 5 seconds. Cool. We're good to go whenever.
Awesome. So if everyone's ready, I'll start off with an off-time roadmap. I'll begin with some background and 3 observations, then go into 2 contentions. My time starts now. Strongly affirm the resolution, college admission should not factor in the development of charity organizations by high school students. Let's start with observations and definitions. Observation number 1 is the definition of charity organizations, which are a type of nonprofit organization whose primary objectives are philanthropy or social well-being. Observation number 2 is that development of a charity organization means being involved in the founding or starting of that organization specifically. This means that within the affirmative world, high school students can still volunteer at already developed charity organizations and have an executive position or climb up the social ladder in that organization that's already developed, and colleges can still factor that work into their decision. It's protected time right now, but I'll take your POI after 20 seconds. Observation number 3 is that just because college apps don't factor in founding nonprofits doesn't mean that students won't do it. We see that students who truly care about a social issue or are passionate about an issue will have 2 options. First, if there's an existing organization in their area who does like the same thing and has the same impact in the specific field, they'll just join the existing organization and have an impact there. If there isn't any available organizations in the area where they can get involved in, they can still start a nonprofit organization to have an impact, and that'll be better because of the fact that it's not going to be solely for the reason to get an advantage in college applications. Now I'll take your PY.
Yeah, for example, if I'm like organizing or if I'm developing curriculum at the Boys and Girls Club, is that constituted of developing or starting that charity, or how does your definitions work with like charities which already exist?
Yeah, so we feel like development of a charity organization in the topic means starting charity organization and like founding it especially. So like kind of small development of curriculum, that's kind of a task that's in the existing organization itself, and it's not assisting the overall development of the entire organization, since we feel that development in the resolution is a more generic kind of overall executive decision on an organization, not really the day-to-day tasks like developing curriculum. So let's go into the first contention, which is performative activism. What is happening right now in the status quo? Uniqueness number 1 is that high school students who found nonprofits frequently abandon them when they graduate and go off to college. Only 5% of high school founded nonprofits succeed and continue past graduation. This shows the primary cause for founding nonprofits and the motivation for doing so is for college apps, which is untrue intentions. This perpetuates a cycle of failure, which is inevitable since most up-and-coming students follow the successful like pathways of people who get into good colleges, right? So that they're going to want to start founding nonprofits as well of their own to get into college. Uniqueness number 2 is this impact called volunteerism. It's travel that combines vacation and volunteering, and it includes short-term programs that typically focus more on the experience of participants versus the actual impact that they leave on the communities in need. So we can see that this is happening because of this college-motivated volunteerism and starting nonprofits for their personal gain. Number 3 is that successfully impacting the lives of the underprivileged often requires a long and concerted effort to produce real change. A nonprofit with a built-in expiration date is less likely to produce lasting change in the communities it's meant to help. So onto the links, the reasons to prefer our plan. Number 1 is the masking effect. High school nonprofits frequently compete with older and more established adult organizations for recognition, funding, volunteer hours. By dividing these limited resources and trying to fill the same exact niche, existing nonprofits are less able to help the same group of people because it's draining away their resources. Number two is brain drain. There's less talent and less student involvement and student ideas going into these existing organizations as well. There's already so many opportunities to demonstrate initiative and community involvement in existing organizations on a day-to-day basis and taking like smaller tasks. Therefore, you're going to be like taking away from like the more effective organizations that have been around for a longer time with more experience. Number three is that adult supervision and collaboration increases effectiveness. Student-run organizations often are like fully or 100% student-run, therefore they lack experience in terms of like time in the industry or time in the niche. So if we work with adults and like go into existing organizations, that's a bigger impact. In addition, number four is that we believe students should fundamentally volunteer within charity organizations for reasons of importance and value when you truly care about the topic, rather than as a means to achieve a private incentive of getting into college. This is inherently what's happening in the status quo, very unethical. Because of these bad intentions, students are more likely to manipulate data, kind of have more like corruption in the process, and makes the entire college application process more illegitimate, taking spots away from people who have actually made a bigger impact, for example, an existing nonprofit or through a super cool club or some kind of like other form of impact that was not necessarily starting your own nonprofit. Because if you start a nonprofit just to say that you started a nonprofit, that's vanity, not volunteering. Onto the impacts. Our impacts are going to be a decrease in quality of life and lives because you're taking away resources from existing nonprofits. And this is a long-term and cyclical impact because in the status quo, people will replicate what gets others into good colleges, right? So this is just going to continue into a continuous like failure of nonprofits that don't extend past into college, and existing nonprofits never recover. This narrative of performative activism is a large reason why charities aren't doing well right now, because it decreases public trust in existing charities. It takes away from that. So changing the narrative is key. Second contention is it creates an unfair advantage. Uniqueness number one is that the college admissions process prioritizes extracurriculars a lot more than grades right now. This is because nationally there was a semester of pass-fail after COVID. Colleges are more skeptical of grades achieved during online schooling, and currently the majority of US colleges have removed the requirement of having standardized testing. These were the main ways in which colleges were able to compare students against each other through objective metrics. Number two is that extracurriculars are considered a soft factor within college admissions, which means they're inherently harder to quantify and compare, but they still hold a massive say in what student gets in, since 41% of US colleges said that extracurriculars are very important to their admissions. Amongst more elite schools, ECs or extracurriculars are cited by the majority of admissions officers as the most important distinguishing factor, since nearly all students are considered already have like perfect grades and test scores. Number three is that higher income applicants are the majority of the people who create these charity organizations for the sole purpose of winning the college admissions game. There's a couple reasons why. Number one, they can only get the initial funding that they need. Low income applicants do not have this type of support. Number two, the process of starting a corporation is incredibly tedious, taking hours of reading paperwork and approval, where low income students often have part-time jobs they need to. They often need a board of directors and need to sustain funding. So the links, number one, there's going to be a more level playing field since the ambiguity surrounding charitable organizations no longer creates an unfair advantage. And number two, lower income applicants have a better shot at being able to compete with higher income applicants if both students must focus. So it's more accessible, leading to equity in education and more students going to college, better quality of life. Thank you.
Hey everyone, are both judges about ready for me to start, and then I can give a brief order? Cool. All right. The order is going to be one observation about the definitions, and then a disadvantage, and then a cap, and then the affirm order in which it was read. Okay. Cool. You can start my 8 minutes of time. Now, hello, Judge. My name is Rohan Sachdev. I'm going to be the first negative speaker in today's resolution. College admission should not factor in the development of charity organizations by high school students. Let's first start with the observation about definitions, specifically about that of the definition of development. Our opponents provide this definition, which is kind of niche and narrow, specifically only focusing on the starting of charities or in the high-level administrative work of charities. We would say that development is more broad than this. We would propose a counter definition of development as to grow or cause to grow and become even more advanced, mature, or elaborate. We would say that this definition is preferable for 3 reasons. The first of which is that it's more real world. People don't always just focus on specifically starting charities to gain an advantage in the college admissions process. They also do it in other forms of extracurriculars and other forms of charities. Secondly, we would say that our definition is much more official. It's according to Merriam-Webster, and it's the practical application of why we're seeing a lot of the charity work happening in the real world right now. And thirdly is because of the issue of holes. We would say that our opponent's definition has a significant hole in it, which is that there's no really bright line as to what is actually starting a charity versus what is not starting a charity. Notice my partner asked this question about the idea of starting curriculums, and they say that it's not part of a charity. However, according to their own definition, it would be administrative work, which means that according to their own text of their definition, it would be charity work. So you can sort of see our opponents flip-flopping back and forth as to what their definition means. And that's just simply because quantifying what starting or doing administrative work in a charity means is hard to understand. We would say that our definition is more broad and encompasses the more ways in which the charity process is used and thus should be considered first. Additionally, Judge, we would tell you that other forms of, I will tell you just another general observation is that other forms of participating in extracurriculars are also classist. Our opponents brings up a few of these, which is the idea of SATs and grades, but also consider the ideas of athletics and internship programs, which specifically rely on students having the resources to get personal trainers, resume workshops, tutoring for SAT programs, et cetera, et cetera. We would say that if colleges are forced to rely on other programs, they're just going to be using those programs instead, which means that the affirmative does not. Now let's go into the main disadvantage of today's round, which is the value of charity work. A little bit of uniqueness for what's going on in the status quo. We're seeing right now that there are a significant number of charities already existing. Over 1 million charities exist in the United States alone, according to a 2016 study, all of which receive significant help from high school students. Also, research from Wales showed that students have a high degree of community engagement when they participate in the leadership of charities. Americans volunteer on average 52 hours per year, but it's been holding steady recently, and it's even higher for high school students. We also know that high school students themselves have even started a number of charities which have become really successful in the past. Look to examples of how charities have helped save thousands of lives started by high school students during the AIDS movement, and even consider organizations like Greta Thunberg's climate organization, which have elevated climate issues, caused millions to protest while engaging with stakeholder groups and even missing school for a lot of climate protests. So how do our opponents make this issue worse? Judge, ultimately what our opponents do is they reduce the amount of charity work which is actually happening. Look to places such as British Columbia, whereby incentive structures for students to volunteer or develop charities led to increased civic participation. But another great example of this is that it forces people to have to choose between school and charity. We say that people are less likely to jeopardize their futures if they aren't able to actually gain an advantage off of starting a charity. Another great example is the Greta Thunberg protest. We say that people high up in Greta Thunberg organization who are developing these protests would not have done it because of parental pressure and risking their entire future. We need to create a world where people are able to participate and develop charities without having to put their entire livelihoods and socioeconomic status on the line. Additionally, we tell you that people going into college also do charity and do it because they did charity in high school. They cited a 15% number, and Judge, sure, even if only 15% of charities exist going into college, we see that those charities are still successful. But additionally, we tell you that those people who start charities go and spread it to people in college and beyond. We know that rates of volunteering in college increase compared to that of high school, and part of that is primarily because high school students are spreading ideas of volunteerism and civic engagement to their peers. So going on to the impacts, the first impact is that of charity work. We see that organizations like National Charity League started and funded by students award millions of dollars in funds to thousands of volunteer organizations which rely on them. Volunteering organizations started by adults rely on students in the status quo. We also know that there's no incentive to save thousands of lives through the AIDS organization, which we mentioned, no incentive to continue participating in the climate organizations, which lobbies for social change. And we know that also people doing charity has a significant event for those people themselves. We tell you that people who participate in charity see better rates of civic engagement and better rates of achieving a job, as they have a 27% better chance of getting employment. So now moving on to the counterplan for today's round, our counterplan is that college admissions officers should value any unpaid charity work equally to any paid summer jobs or internships. So let's go a little bit into the solvency. What exactly does this plan do and what does it mean? Right now in the United States, there are significant, at the end. There are significant inequalities which exist with regards to summer volunteering and internships. While many high school students with more resources and wealth apply to unpaid volunteering positions over the summer, many low-income high school students are forced to apply to get, say, a summer job or don't have access to these opportunities, as our points pointed out. However, how does the counterpoint solve for this? We say that the counterpoint solves for class-based inequality by making college admissions officers value both summer activities equally. It creates a world which rewards social activism and paid resources if that's what makes sense for people in their unique situations. We create a world where if people were so inclined to go and do charity work, if they had the resources to do so without getting paid, they're still incentivized to do that, whereas our world where they're not incentivized to do so. Yes, your question.
How is this different from the status quo since colleges already value them both as extracurriculars?
They don't. As you mentioned in your uniqueness, some colleges value specifically unpaid charity work more as opposed to jobs. We say we need a world where people are not valued based on their socioeconomic resources, whereas you guys just throw the whole system out of the window. Okay, going on to the arguments which my opponents make. The first idea is that of this idea of performative activism. I already addressed their definition. However, they bring up this argument about how only 15% of students actually continue a lot of these organizations. They try to tell you this narrative about how volunteerism and long concerted efforts about how high school charities are not successful. I already gave you 2 examples of organizations which are specifically working to help these sorts of issues, right? But additionally, we would tell you that the existence of starting your own charity is uniquely better for a lot of high school students. We say that's true for 3 reasons. Number one is we tell you that it encourages working with schools. People who start charities in high schools are more likely to work with schools to create mandatory volunteering programs. A great example of this is, again, in British Columbia, where we see that student-led organizations are volunteering with their own schools and encouraging community service programs for all students who are all able to get the benefits of community service. Secondly is this idea of just being better for the students generally, right? We say that students which are able to start their own organizations based on their own needs are able to bring their own unique perspective to issues, which specifically affect youth in general. Youth who actually understand certain issues are more likely to want to help with them. Now, they tell you that students are not going to go to existing organizations. However, we say that existing student-led organizations only represent a small percentage of all of the organizations in the status quo. However, they represent a really unique part and a really diverse perspective. The role of the negative is one where student-led and adult-led charities coexist and help each other, and they're able to work together to achieve the issues which students actually need. That's why we're seeing student-led organizations prescribe funding to other charity organizations. There are adult-led charities which rely on student-led charities as well. Now, going into their arguments about this idea of prioritizing extracurriculars, et cetera, et cetera. I already brought up this point about the idea that people are just going to be reliant on other systems, which we would say are actually much, much worse because they're reliant on systems which are actually more wealth-based, i.e. you're not even doing something good, you're just getting funding through tutors and stuff. We would say that if there's a certain type of charity, a certain type of volunteering, it should probably be the one which actually helps people. But additionally, we told you already that the counterplans are actually able to solve for this issue, by ensuring that people are actually able to do this work and are not getting an unfair advantage. So for all the reasons of the fact that charities are doing a good job and valuable to people in the status quo, as well as the idea of the definition of development and the fact that our opponents do not actually tell you how they're going to be able to solve this issue of poverty, I strongly urge you to vote.
Hello everyone, my name is Anshka Banda. With an off-term roadmap, I'm going to be starting off with an overview on this debate, addressing the observations on the definitions, moving into the negatives case, and then the affirmatives case. Are there any questions before I begin? Nope. Okay. With that being said, my time starts now. If I'm a high school student that wants to make a change in the world, I'm ethically going to still join a charitable organization. When the opponents come up here and ask us, what is the incentive for a student to help out with the AIDS campaign if there's no incentive for college? The incentive is that they're solving AIDS. This is why you're going to be voting affirmative. With that, let's start off with the observations. The first observation the opponents read is that our definition is too limited because, what does it constitute? What is the distinction here? And how theirs is preferable because they're allowing people to get real world experience. I have a couple of responses to this. Number one, we're saying that our definition clearly has a byline because our byline is founding the organization, right? We're telling you that if you found the organization, that means that you're part of the initial development, and that is the distinction because there is a very clear distinction. But second of all, we're saying that the unethicality and lack of access comes through the funding part of the organization, right? If you cannot fund an organization, like the people that can fund an organization are usually the higher income people, right? Which means that if you're lower income, you can still help you can still help the organization, but not in the development because you can't help to found them because you can't help to fund them. That's going to be key here. But third of all, look at the fact that when they ask what is the distinction, like this doesn't matter because at the end of the day, all schools usually have a service hour requirement, which requires people to volunteer in certain organizations, right? But fourth of all, look at the fact that they're still good, like the definition here doesn't matter that much because there's still good reasons as to why you can volunteer. And this doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? Even if there's a world in which your administration work is not counted as volunteering, it doesn't matter because that administration work probably still has a good reason, but we've clearly shown you as to why administrative work versus developmental work are clearly different because of this distinction on founding. The other argument, the second observation the opponents read is that it's also classist, that there's other things that are also classist, right? The overview here is that any change away from classism is going to be good. We see that number one, uniquely, when we move away from having like nonprofits or charitable organizations within the extracurricular game, it's going to increase the accessibility and predictability. How? Because if students know that the only thing they have to do to get into college is to get good grades, do well in the SAT or ACT, and also perform in in-school activities, that's a lot easier of a threshold to meet, right? Low-income communities do not have the resources to make these charitable organizations, and oftentimes they don't even know that they have to do that, which is why they're deprioritized, right? It's a lot easier to do what you know. It's a lot easier. It's more predictable if you have a high school club, right? So if everybody's being adjudicated on this issue of like, how involved were you in your high school clubs, which everybody has access to, that's going to be a lot better. But second of all, we're going to argue that the opponents are actually worse with their counterplan, as we'll prove later, because them saying that the summer internships and charitable organizations are valued equally does, at the end of the day, nothing for increasing equity. All that it does is helps higher income people because it doesn't do anything to actively help lower income communities and decrease the bar of the extracurriculars that they need to meet in order to be competitive applicants. With that, let's move into the negative plan. The first argument the negative reads is how performative activism is basically a good thing and how high schoolers that start up their own nonprofits are actually doing good things. I've got a lot of arguments here. Number one, on the uniqueness level, the only two arguments that the opponents talk about are like the Greta Thunberg environmental campaign and also the campaign for AIDS. Greta Thunberg is not doing this for college. The fact is that there's actually an incentive that is climate change. For the AIDS campaign, there is an incentive here, which is to solve AIDS. To the point where the opponents tell you that the only reason why these volunteers are participating in these organizations, and they would not participate in these organizations for any reason other than college admissions, is a unique reason as to why the current status quo is bad. Because it means that once they get into college, they're literally going to stop volunteering. This is something that the opponents' timeline does not change at all. But also, but also on performative activism, one more thing on the observation level. On the definition, one more thing on the definition level, sorry, just hopping back really quickly. Our definition is more real world based and relevant because we're able to have more discussions on unnecessary student nonprofits. This is going to be key because students have already been helping with curriculum or like tutoring and things like that for a long time. Right now, the issue in the status quo, which the affirms probably wants to talk about, is like unnecessary student nonprofits. We have at least 15 student-funded nonprofits at our school right now, which is why we have this disapproval. This is a major issue within California. Sorry about that hopscotching. I'm just going to go back to the negatives case now. Coming back onto my refutes, the first argument that I read was about Greta Thunberg and how it's probably a bad thing that their incentive is so bad. Second of all, look at the fact that this argument is just non-responsive to the fact that in the long term, these nonprofits collapse. Extends to this argument that only 5% of these nonprofits exist afterwards. So judges, what does this mean at the end of the day? The opponents try to say that it's a good thing that at least 5% of these nonprofits continue. But what the bad thing is that 95% of these nonprofits or the people that are working in these nonprofits could have been helping other large volunteer initiatives during that time frame, which they actively do not do. The opponents do not respond to our arguments about brain drain and our arguments about how there's limited resources, right? Judge, at the end of the day, if you are a 15-year-old and you want to make an impact in your local community, we argue the best thing that you can do is partner with a larger organization that has people that are working full-time in order to make the change that you were trying to seek. It is worse if you try to compete and you delude yourself into the fact that you can actually compete with these actual organizations. If you are like that smart of a student, you're still going to find a way to do really well with these larger organizations. Again, the narrative of performative activism is still really bad in the status quo. If what the opponents were saying is a good thing, then why is, for example, charitability after college decreasing as a whole, right? We see that this narrative of transactionality is the long run because in order to have long-term charitability or long-term long-term progress, you need to have personal motivations that are associated with the work that you're doing. The opponents are continuing the narrative of having private incentives of getting into college. On our link level, we talk about how, like, again, isn't climate change and solving climate change the incentive? Isn't that an incentive enough? Then on their counterplan about how charities equal to, like, colleges, their counterplan is that colleges should count charity equivalent to summer work. There's 3 reasons why this is just completely bad. Number 1, we already told you that extracurriculars are a soft category in college admissions, which means that it's so hard for colleges to evaluate. What does it mean to compare one thing to another thing equally? If I intern at NASA versus if I solve world hunger, how can somebody think that those 2 things are equal? It's just incredibly hard to wrap your head around, which means that at the evaluation level for colleges, it's going to be incredibly hard for them to compare this, which means that at the end of the day, their entire thing is non-solvent because there's no way how this is actually going to work. But second of all, this doesn't solve at all for the root issue of inequality, since both are not accessible to low-income communities. If I'm a low-income student, I can not only not start my own charity, but I can also not perform summer work because I'm probably going to have to take up a part-time job, which means that this just does not solve for low-income communities, which is a unique argument that we can win. But also, third, Selena's right. This is incredibly similar to the status quo right now, where both charity and summer work are already counted as valid extracurriculars that you can do. Okay, with that, let's move into the affirmatives case. First of all, extend the argument that says that only 5% of nonprofits continue after high school. The arguments the opponents read is that starting your own nonprofit is uniquely good because you can work with schools. Judges, this is not a good thing because extend the analysis that I just read that says that the best thing that you can do is partner with other organizations. At our school, there are 15 nonprofits that are all dedicated to tutoring. None of them work within the school. If all those people just pull themselves together to just form one overall funding mechanism within the school, that would be so much better. The fact of the matter is that all these students are competing against each other to make their one nonprofit be the best, not to actually make an impact because of college admissions. Because at the end of the day, what they want to do on their admissions is want to say how much more impact they made than other people. This is uniquely a bad thing because we're telling you that, like, the impact should not be compared. Any good thing that you do is a good thing for the sake of the fact that it's helping someone out. And that's something that needs to actually, like, be prioritized in the long run, right? At the end of the day, right now, there's no coexistence between schools and these nonprofits. That's exactly why we need to change the narrative. Okay, other arguments here other arguments in the counterplan is that the CP is pretty much the same thing as the status quo. This is also a new reason to buy our definition of development, since positions actually matter. Okay, now onto our second contention about an unfair advantage. This is where you can already vote for the affirmative because we're the only side that's doing anything to even the playing field. Extend the observation that I read that tells you that it is more important to have some sort of solvency and predictability as to what a low-income student has to do to actually get into college, because in-school activities are a lot more easier to do than out-of-school activities that are just hard to prioritize. Thank you. For these reasons, vote affirmative.
Cool. So before I begin my speech, a brief off summary roadmap of the topics I'm going to be covering. I'm going to be giving an overview of the round, going into the definition debate, and then going over the negative arguments and then the affirmative arguments. Anyone not ready? Hello, Judge. My name is Sam Yonker, and I'm going to be the second negative speaker in today's resolution that college admission officers should not factor in the development of charity organizations by high school students. Going first off into this definition debate. I know this definition debate is a bit convoluted and a bit confusing, so let me summarize it to you. Basically, affirmative is telling you that the development of charity organizations only consists of someone starting a charity organization. Well, the negative, our side, tells you that the development of a charity organization consists of things beyond just starting the charity organization. Our definition is probably much more real world, and the definition you should be prioritizing today's debate. Because let's just think through about this intuitively. If I'm, say, for example, volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club, a nationwide nonprofit that helps with curriculum development for teachers, in addition to providing for extracurricular commitments, extracurricular activities for low-income students. If I am, say, volunteering there and I help to develop curriculum for this charity, that still constitutes of me volunteering for the charity. I'm not starting the charity, but I'm still advancing the charity, moving the charity forward, something which definitely falls under the realm of developing the charity. This is why my opponent's definition of someone helping out at the charity is only constituting someone starting a charity is pretty illogical and is not reflective of the real world. This is why you should be prioritizing, or this is why you should be preferring the fact that someone helping out with a charity most definitely is the development of that charity. If I'm helping a charity's mission, that is developing that charity. It does not just have to constitute with me founding a charity. Given their definition, it doesn't even make sense either, because once you start a charity, given their definition, there's nothing you can do to develop the charity any further. You can only just start it, and that's it. This is why my opponent's definition is pretty illogical and matters pretty significantly to the context of the round, because under their definition, none of our arguments make any sense. And that's pretty important, because it means that the negative doesn't have any ground in today's debate if you buy their definitions. Furthermore, going into kind of what does this debate actually come down to? I know this debate's pretty confusing. I was getting pretty confused as well. And let me just summarize it to you as judges. Basically, the thing which you need to keep in mind is that even if college admissions, or that right now, college admission officers still really care about non-charity based activities. For example, if I'm a college admission officer at Stanford and I see someone who's been doing a bunch of internships at, say, like fintech companies or CS programs, all these fancy internships, I'm going to value that significantly more than other programs, other volunteer programs per se. The problem with this is that, as my opponents tell you themselves, if I really care, I'm going to get to it after this. If I really care, let's say, for example, stopping the AIDS movement or trying to stop climate change, I can't do that because I know that college admissions officers care more about my fancy internship at JP Morgan. At the end of the day, the problem which currently exists is that college admission officers care significantly more about real life work experience. They care significantly more about me working for JP Morgan and me getting that nice college experience, which will help me later in life and possibly make me a better student when I, say, for example, graduate college, than they do about me helping for some local climate action initiative. We see this as pretty important, and this is where the counterplan comes into way, because the counterplan basically says these two things are equal. Because if I really want to work for an AIDS organization or I really want to work for a climate organization, but I know it's not going to get me into college, my parents or external pressures may tell me I can't go work for that organization. So the thing is, at the end of the day, we want to make sure these two things are equal, to basically remove any societal factors. And thus, the best way to do that is to convince and tell college counselors and tell college admission officers they can't actually value this person's JP Morgan internship over this person's actual tangible climate action work, which they are doing. This is what the debate comes down to, and this is what the negative is advocating for. Rather than actually trying to address the root cause of the issue and actually try to fix the issue, what the affirmative is advocating for in today's debate is the abolition of the entire system. They tell you no, the entire system's backwards. We shouldn't have to address it at all. Screw the entire system. At the end of the day, that's what the affirmative is arguing in today's debate. Well, the negative is telling you no, there is a way we could get this system to work, which meaningfully and beneficially helps everyone involved. This is the world of the negative, and this is the world of what the negative is articulating to you in this debate. Fundamentally, all of the responses the affirmative makes with regards to, oh, these students still want to do something which is meaningfully changing the world, are fundamentally negated by the fact that that's not what's happening around us. At the end of the day, even if you value, what the affirmative is telling you, and what the negative is also telling you, is that college admission officers don't really value charities. College admission officers would rather see that your JP Morgan internship is getting you valuable financial work experience compared to, let's say, for example, you working in a Menlo Park or a Palo Alto climate action initiative or a climate organization. So this is why the negative counterplan is so important. Let's go into the disadvantage. There are a bunch of benefits of volunteering at charities. The negative, it really harps on this argument, and it means a lot to us. And specifically that because volunteering at charities is so important, especially for high school students, it better prepares people for civic engagement, to better engage with local politics, governments, state governments, whatever it may be, in addition to better preparing them for college and better preparing them for beyond, whatever awaits them beyond college. It helps people when trying to get a job later in life and actually provides a meaningful alternative to actually doing some good in the world compared to some kind of work experience which may not be doing that. It can, but keep in mind that oftentimes a lot of charities are specifically trying to do good in the world. Something that we agree is very, very good. If you are doing good for the world, if you are trying to, have safe distribution sites for needles or different things like this, basically where you're meaningfully helping people, this is something which you can only do when volunteering at a charity organization, and it's something which is sadly college admission officers don't care a lot about. Furthermore, we tell you there are a bunch of impacts for why volunteering at charities is super important, why we should get rid of this whole prioritization system and that college admission officers have, and just make the two things equal. Because reminder, at the end of the day, people should be able to do what they want. People should be able to volunteer at a charity if they genuinely believe in that mission of that charity. And right now, both teams agree that's not happening. So the question when you're signing your ballot, judge, is what do you want to do? How do you want to fix this problem? Do you just want to kind of get rid of it, kind of sweep it away, pretend it doesn't happen? Or do you actually want to encourage students, incentivize students to actually do things which help them later in life, actually encourage them to do things which meaningfully make an impact to the world? And this is why the negative counterplan fundamentally is going to be winning in today's debate, because we actually do something to fix the problem rather than the affirmative, which just says, oh, they shouldn't consider any of this at all. Students still want to have a meaningful experience or still want to do something meaningful in the world. And the best way to do that is by going with the negative counterplan, the counter policy here, and not the affirmative plan. Moving on to the affirmative case. There are a bunch of arguments they don't talk about and a bunch of things about why charities are super important. Specifically, this divide between charities ultimately still do some good things in the world. Even if a lot of student-run charities oftentimes either don't succeed or don't succeed later in college, if students actually have the time, what the negative counterplan would allow for, to do charity work in college or do charity work in high school, then that would probably increase the number of charities which would be successful later in college. If students can now basically work on charities and work with these charities and work on maybe their own charity, work for a charity which they're working for, and actually try to build on that charity is going to have a higher chance of success. Only can that happen in the world of the negative. All of these arguments that only 15% of charities succeed after high school because all these high school kids are only using the charity to get into college. But we tell you, if kids are actually able to invest their hard work and invest their heart into a mission, into a social movement which they care about, that charity is going to have a significantly higher chance of working. Only does that happen in the world of the negative. That doesn't happen in the world of the affirmative. That only happens in the world of the counterpoint. Furthermore, the cooperation between student-run charities and adult charities is super key because although student-run charities they're obviously run by high schoolers, they may not be as developed or have enough experience running charities, they're ultimately extremely impactful. We see that high school students around the world have made significant changes, especially in the context of the AIDS movement and AIDS charities to provide people with different types of AIDS drugs and AIDS support, and Greta Thunberg, for example, for the climate movement, and getting high school students around the country to actually rally around a universal cause and a universal change. So it's abundantly clear that for all of these reasons, valuing high school students and making sure that high school students can actually do things which make a change in the world is infinitely preferable in the world of the negative. And as such, you should be voting for the negative because our counter policy is infinitely better than the affirmative. Thank you.
Hey, Judge. Again, my name is Rohan. Just a quick overview. I would flow the last speech on a separate sheet of paper. However, if you choose not to do that, I'll touch briefly on the definitions debate, and then I'll go into this idea of the observation at the top about how other formats will just be relied on, and then I'll spend most of my time on the disadvantage. Cool. All right. Is everyone ready? Awesome. You can start my time now. The overview to today's round is that the affirmative throws the whole system out the window. Organizations cannot be started by high school students to actually help people because people don't have the time or ability to go and participate in volunteering organizations or to go start volunteering organizations because they have to go get their fancy JP Morgan internship to get into college. Let's start briefly with the idea of this definitions debate, right? There's a number of different ideas, and as my partner said, it's a little bit confusing as to what development actually means. Now remember, we say that there's a reason why the resolution says development as opposed to start. It is because development includes more things than just starting a charity. It includes participating in the development of curriculum work. It includes outreach. It includes administrative work. It includes starting all of these new charities, which is really important and actually helping to ensure that these charities are developed along, right? So we tell you that it's more than just this idea of starting, but it's actually development. That's what the resolution says. Now, secondly, let's go into this idea of how other formats will just be relied on to get into college. And that's sort of the main thesis of this debate right now, right? Let's look at what's going on right now. People are not able to help out with a lot of these charities because they're more worried about getting other life experience, which colleges value more. The affirmative approach is to say, no, let's throw that whole system out the window. Let's ensure that people who are going and starting charities, people who are going and developing charities, people who are going and doing any work at charities are simply not valued by colleges. The negative says, let's value charity work because charity work is inherently valuable, but let's value it at an equal proposition to other forms so that people who have to go and do paid work because they can't afford to take time and go to charities are actually able to also get into college too. The negative is the best of both worlds. It solves a lot of their issues about the issues of income inequality. However, it also ensures that colleges and that charities actually valuable to colleges, equally valuable. Now, the third and most important point of today's round is the idea that college admissions should inherently value charity work at least some level. We would say that charity work is inherently valuable. We give you a few examples, and they tried to say that people like Greta Thunberg are not incentivized to start these organizations to get into college. But here's the issue. When I'm starting a charity, right, when I'm going and starting the next big charity organization, I have to take time off of school. I have to take time off of other work and other opportunities. It's a big time commitment, right? And we tell you that the next big person, it might not be able to actually sacrifice their entire likelihood, their entire probability of getting into college because they simply want to start a charity organization. right? We say that there needs to be a system where people are actually able to start charities without having to sacrifice their entire livelihood, without having to endure endless parental pressure, without having to see a dip in grades, right? So we say that the negative solves this issue because we provide an outlet for students to actually demonstrate and start charities for what they're interested in. Now, let's talk a little bit about what we think our opponents are going to go for. They're probably going to tell you about how students can just go and use existing organizations under their world. Now we have two responses. First is this idea of that there's no ability, right? Now we already gave you this definition, but let's put that to the side for a moment. Even students who actually start charities provide charities which are inherently valuable and actually impact adult-run charities too. I gave you this example in my first speech of the National Charity League, which went unresponded to by my opponents, which ensures that hundreds or even thousands of charities are actually able to exist. If students aren't starting charities, then the adults-run charities, which rely on student-run charities, also aren't starting. The affirmative creates this run-on effect where charities keep closing and closing and closing because people are actually reliant on student-run organizations. But also remember that students are not actually able to start the next big charity under the world of the affirmative because they are worried about simply having their livelihoods destroyed under the world of the affirmation. Now, they might also go for these arguments about income inequality and about performative activism. Remember, when you consider today's round, the affirmative throws this whole system out the window. The negative creates a system or a world wherein people are actually able to start charities without being worried about the income inequality aspect of it. And if they can't start a charity, fine, they can go and demonstrate their college involvement in other ways. But only the negative actually creates a balance between those two worlds when people who are able to start charities are able to do so, but they're not being incentivized more than people who don't start charities. So for all of these reasons, I strongly urge a vote for the negative.
Okay, off our roadmap, I'll begin with one observation on the definitions debate, an observation on the counter plan, and then go into impact analysis. My time starts now. First on the definitions debate. First, extend my partner's response about how our definition is more real world and relevant, because right now in the status quo, there are more discussions being held and controversies surrounding founding student nonprofits. That's why so many college consulting companies right now are not sure and encouraging students to found their own nonprofits for the process of gaming the college admission system, right? That's why so many students right now, like us, are so have 15 student founded nonprofits at our own schools. That's what discussions are focused on right now, and that's why this is the most relevant to the topic. It's probably the framer's intent as well. Secondly, extend my partner's review about how multiple definitions are in the dictionary for development specifically, so you can't really rely on the reliability of Merriam-Webster. We have to adjust and interpret the definition for this resolution specifically. In addition, extend how there's no bright lines. There is a bright line for our definition because of the fact that we specifically say founding as in one of the executive team members in the very beginning, and you can continue that. Okay, now on the counter plan. However, even if you don't buy our definition, I'll still be proving why we win on their definition later on. On the counter plan, extend my partner's first response about how unpaid charity work is weighed the same as activity groups with paid internships right now. It's the position and the involvement level that makes one student valued higher over the other. So because of the fact that the activity groups are weighed the same, the counterplan is exactly the same as the status quo. And because of the difference in position and involvement, that's a unique reason to buy our definition of development, since positions and founding things matter. In addition, there's no bright lines in this counterplan since there's different levels of involvement. So rich people who are more involved, have more time, more money, who can pay their way up, are still going to be prioritized. So prioritization of rich people who have an advantage are still existing in the counterplan. But in addition, let's go into impact analysis. On the first impact is long-term impact. That's going to be the reason why the affirmative is winning today's debate. The negative concedes that only 5% of student-founded nonprofits succeed past graduation. This is a statistic that we've been repeating since the very first speech. This shows that the status quo is bad right now and that we have to do something. In the long term, these existing adult charitable organizations are being run over by student organizations because they're being outcompeted for grants, outcompeted for resources, less talent and student ideas in these existing organizations than there could be in the affirmative world, which means that in the long term, we're going to be encouraging people who truly truly care, filtering out the people who are only doing it for college applications, doing it for unethical reasons, for vanity and for personal reasons, and increasing the quality, providing more resources for nonprofits that are truly like going to help people more in the long term. This is going to increase quality of life, increases resources, increases funding towards low-income communities and like marginalized groups who are being helped by these nonprofits. And with the long term over the short term, because of the fact that it's going to help more people under net benefits. Okay, and this is also a higher magnitude impact. Under our definition specifically, people are still going to serve and volunteer as existing organizations, but under their definition, we're still going to be filtering out the people right now. Okay. The second impact is going to be low-income students. So we've already told you about how service is still going to be prioritized over money, right? There's still going to be a difference in the types of paid internships. For example, you can be paid for working at a different company that's for social impact, that's environmental justice company. However, you could also be paid for JP Morgan, but the environmental justice company is probably going to be valued more, which means there's still subgroups that help low-income students in these like other types of extracurriculars, other internships, other summer volunteering opportunities, right? So they're still going to be helped. And we'd actually say that school involvement is even better in the affirmative world. In addition, the negative's whole argument here is that when students have limited time and parental pressure, they're not going to do work. This is false for 3 reasons. They're still going to do legitimate work because it matters to them. We would say that there's 15 people, 3 people have personal reasons to do charity work, and the 12 people are only there for college. Under our world, we know that in the short term, the 12 non-committed people will leave. That's a good thing because there's more resources for people who are committed. They're probably not doing much anyways at all anyway. So we're not losing as much. It's better to keep only the good activism in the world than the performative activism, because in the long term, prioritizing true activism is better. The people who have truly care, they don't care about the time commitment it takes to make a nonprofit. They're still going to do that for the benefit of making an impact on AIDS. They don't care about the opportunity cost that they're not going to get a summer internship because they know the value of their work matters more. The negation concedes that more people do less activism after high school because of performative activism. So that means that the only side who is changing the narrative of this unethical practice is the affirmative, which means this is a try or die scenario. Even if we have 1% chance of solving the problem, we're still going to be winning today's debate on both definitions, especially. So for all these reasons, because we have high probability, higher magnitude, long-term impacts for the people who are committed, who are going to be having more resources than existing nonprofits, we're going to be winning today's debate. Thank you.
Well, good round, everyone.
Good round, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Good round.
Judge, do you want to go fill out the ballot real quick before we come back and announce? Or do you want to just?
Oh, are we going to announce?
Yeah, I think they want disclosure.
Okay.
Just,
So then, yeah, we should make our decision first, submit the ballot.
and then we'll be right back.
Yeah.
Cool. That's good. Thanks, everyone.
I have submitted a ballot. Ready when you are.
All right, I submitted as well.
Do you want to go first, or I can go first? Are the students here?
Nueva's here.
Okay. Do you want me to just give my decision, or you guys want feedback as well?
It's encouraged.
Feedback would be really helpful.
Yep.
Okay, so I voted for the gov. This debate was really confusing, and because most debates, right, they have a single problem that the AF seeks to solve, and the neg either argues that the AF solution is bad or offers an alternative solution, right? But this debate felt like there were two separate problems and you each were trying to solve your own respective problem. Like it didn't feel like you guys were on like the same page. And I think that might have been due to the definition. But it just made it really confusing as to like what what the problem was, because normally I would say, oh, the neg solves it better or the aff solves it better, but they were completely different. I think trying to single out each problem would have been a lot easier for me to weigh this debate. The current view on charity work for college admissions was also very confusing as to like what the current stance is from college admissions and how they view it. Because the aff made it seem like it wasn't viewed the same as jobs, whereas the neg said the opposite. I think the problem was that it was very hard to quantify the detriment of 95% of student-run charities failing versus how much charity work would stop if college admissions did not consider it. I feel like there was a lot of guesswork on the impacts there. And so that also made it hard to weigh the debate. But also, I think it really just came down to the definition debate, which is a very big determiner. I ended up choosing the aff's definition because it made more sense to me, right? Like, I don't think if I was just packaging products at Amazon that I could call myself a developer of Amazon, right? Or if like I was just doing art for a video game, I don't think I could call myself a game developer, right? I feel like that word holds a lot more in the creation aspect, and that's why I opted for the aff's definition. And so for that reason, the aff had a lot more ground in this debate for me, since they could eliminate the harms of students creating nonprofits while keeping the benefits of students participating in nonprofits. I think that was really big. I also felt that the neg's counter plan did not eliminate all inequality like they said it would. I feel like there would still be a lot of inequality between like the kinds of jobs and the kinds of nonprofits kids would join. Right? Like, I think that if someone had a job at like JP Morgan as an internship, it would still have a lot more weight than someone who worked a job at like McDonald's, right? I think that, or like within nonprofits, I think like if you were just picking up trash off the floor, it would have a lot less impact than one like fighting AIDS, right? I think there's still a lot of inequality in terms of the kinds of nonprofits and the kinds of job people have access to. So I didn't really buy that the neg's counter plan would just eliminate all inequality in college admissions. And for those reasons, I voted for the aff.
Right. Wow, that's quite nice. Well done. I also voted for the aff, and I think the key determinant, like you said, I also agree, was the definition, and I did also prefer the more limited definition of the word development. Otherwise, once you start expanding it, then it extends to just any volunteerism potentially. And that just wipes out the whole purpose of having this debate, I would think. And so where do you draw the line of the definition of the word development? So I think it turned out to be important in this debate. I agree that the rest of the points, there wasn't a very clear, I guess the word is used, clash. I'm not 100% confident if that's the right word. It's not a lot of point for point clash. It was like the other judge said, seems like two different narratives are being laid out in front of us, and we were trying to connect those points on paper. I have a lot of arrows and then scratching out the arrows. No, this is not where they were connecting. Right? It wasn't easy to follow. It was like two sets of arguments being made in parallel, and then so it was easy then to actually just lean on the definition. And with a limited definition of the word development, I think the aff made a convincing case. I think the point that just hammered it in for me was that the 3 out of 15 actually care about the work that they're doing, and the 12 others will just go away once the admission aspect is taken away, and then having more resources available for those 3 people who actually mean to do what they're doing, right? So again, if you don't exclude volunteering or charity work, just take away the development aspect. So yeah, so I think to me that last point at the end is like, yeah, that's right. Okay, so more resources, more time, more people. So that's I think that's what I have to say. But It was hard to follow, and I'm not sure if it was. You guys are very skilled speakers, so I think it's the definition. Since the definitions weren't matching, it just felt like there were two different conversations going on.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much, both judges, for your feedback, and thank you, competitors,
you.
as well. Everything made complete sense. And yeah, thank you for the decision and taking your time to judge around. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good luck in your future rounds.
Yep. Good luck, everyone.